All right, welcome to this edition of In the Conference Room with Mark S. Lee. I hope you're having a great day. Hope you had a great weekend. And hey, it's getting here. Spring is slowly creeping in here. Hang tight, we're getting there. My name is Mark S. I'm your host for this podcast in the conference room, and we talk to business leaders from across the great city of Detroit, the state of Michigan, and beyond. And today is no exception. We have a very special guest, as all my guests are very special, of course. I'd like to welcome to the conference room Mr. Tom Henderson, and he's a Michigan Journalism Hall of Famer. He's been a longtime writer, journalism person here in Detroit, the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, Crain's Detroit. Hey, I blog for Crain's Detroit, uh, and amongst other things that he's doing. And now he's an author. So we're going to have a fun conversation today about a book that he wrote, and I will let him give you the name of it. Tom Henderson from the hinterlands up north. Thanks for joining me in the conference room. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Sunny, going to be 38. Not much better than that in northern Michigan in early March.
Well, you're up there in God's country, beautiful country up there. Wow. I got to tell you, I've obviously been following your work for a long time and been reading your work for a long time as well. Before we jump into your book, which is a fascinating book, by the way, just kind of give us a brief overview of your career. I mean, the Free Press, the news, and just kind of give us some highlights of your journalism career here in Detroit.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's a very non-planned career. I was a political science major in college, wasn't going to go to law school, wasn't going to get a PhD. There's nothing you can do with a bachelor's in political science. So I was working at the Unaroyal factory near Belle Isle, and I was there about 6 months, and people there knew I had a college degree, and they kept saying, if you stay here a year, you'll be here for life. You didn't go to college to work in a factory. So one day I called in sick, went downtown, and went to every place that I could think of that might hire somebody, insurance companies, telephone company, banks. End of the day, I see the Free Press building. I walk in and applied for a job. In the admin in the city room said, what newspapers did you work for? None. What journalism school did you go to? None. She goes, you didn't work at a paper, you haven't gone to journalism school, and you're applying for a job at the Detroit Free Press? I said, yeah. She just started laughing. And she says, see that old man down there? And she pointed me to an old man standing up. And she goes, he hires copy boys. I said, what do they do? She goes, sharpen pencils and get reporters lunch. So I went down, introduced myself. He let me fill out an application. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a stack of about 100 and said, here's how many I have ahead of you. So don't hold your breath. End of the day, I drive home. I thought, oh, God, I'm going to be in Unaroyal the rest of my life. I walk into the house. My wife said, some guy named Fred Spring just called, said to call him back. I call him back. He said, somebody just quit without giving me any notice 2 minutes after you left. You want a job? Start Monday. So I come in Monday. I said, Fred, you showed me all those applications. I said, why me? And this is Vietnam era, right? He says, you know how long it's been since I've seen somebody, a young man in a sport coat and tie? And he says, besides, I'm retiring at the end of this week, and I thought it'd be nice to start another young man off on his career. That was April of 1971, and 55 years later, I'm still at it.
Yeah, yeah. I've been reading your columns for a long time, your stories for a long time, and obviously your Crain's articles in Crain's Detroit Business. Where I think you were a finance writer at one point, and I know you still contributing to Crain's. And as you know, I've been a blogger for Crain's for a long time as well. I know our paths kind of cross that respect of you reading my stuff, me reading your stuff. But this segue, I think that your background story is such fascinating because it became a nice story for your book. And I want to spend some time chatting about the book. And it's the name of it, I believe, A Boomer's Tale. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm a boomer, right? Born in 1948. You don't get no more boomerish than that.
That's going to be my question. How did you come up with the title based on the fact that you're a baby boomer?
I'm a baby boomer, and I'll try not to spend too much time on the weird parts of it, but it's sort of a phrase that gets connected to baby boomers, and it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I thought, well, I can use that, and I can also talk about finance, high tech, covering baseball, covering Michigan football, just a bunch of cool stuff. But maybe I'll get the people who really want to, see wonder what crazy stuff this boomer is. Well, I'll call it a boomer's tale, and they can find out.
You know what? As I read the book, I would say it this way, Tom. It's a trip down memory lane. I mean, just some of the stories you were sharing in terms of not me personally, but some of the names throughout the book, some of the situations and situations that part of the story you were telling. As a native Detroiter, some of the locations you identified, some of the watering holes you identified. It to me was just like a trip down memory lane of what was happening in the 70s and 80s, and you were an integral part of that. I was amazed at how much you opened up about yourself, in terms of the stories you were pitching to the free press about, some of your challenges that you were going through and how you sold those stories. So talk to us about some of the highlights from, your experiences at the free press. You talked about, you were pretty candid about cocaine use and some other challenges that you had going through in those days. Talk to us about some of those points in the story that you want people to really latch on to.
Well, it was a fascinating. I had Neil Shine, who became just the greatest publisher in the history of the free press. He was managing editor. He just kind of took me under his wing when I was sharpening pencils. And after a year, I became the head copy boy, and then he sent me to Action Line, and they got me up into sports to edit copy. I'd never edited anything in my life. I'd been at the paper 3 years. He says, "Hey, Monday you're going to start as a copy editor in sports." I'm like, "What?" And he says, "That's no big deal." He handed me a book. He said, "They all think it's rocket science." The book was Solid Gold Copy Editor. He says, "Read it over the weekend. You'll be fine." Well, through happenstance, a couple of years later, I ended up as the beat writer for the Detroit Red Wings. The guy who had the beat quit on no notice with like 8 games left in the season. I was playing hockey 3 nights a week. So they gave me the job for 8 games, and it turned into 4 years. It's pure happenstance. I broke the news that Kirk Gibson was not going to play in the National Football League, was going to sign with the Tigers. I broke the news that the biggest story of my career, that Ted Lindsay, the general manager of the Red Wings, was not, as he claimed he was going to do, re-sign Gordie Howe and his kids, which would have been the biggest news story in the history of Detroit sports. I broke the news that it ain't happening. So pretty cool, exciting stuff. Just fell into my lap. Drugs sort of fell into my lap too. It was an era of drugs. The free press, the news, reporters, editors, people were, that's what people did in the late 70s. They did lots of drugs, way too much. I got into that for a couple of years, and everyone at the free press knew I was a drug addict and a drug salesman. So I thought, what can I do? I'll pitch the free press on, hey, how about we do a series on rookie runners for the upcoming Free Press Marathon, 1981, and I'll run a marathon just to show you that I'm not doing coke day and night. And ended up, I had no plan for this, but I did this one marathon, and I was never going to run another one. And I woke up the next day planning on how will I do it better next year, and traded one unhealthy addiction to one healthy addiction.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And as I was, again, reading the book, that as a Detroiter growing up, everybody read the free press, everybody read the news, everybody watched the local TV stations. I mean, that was our source of information. Certainly, there was no internet, no app TVs and smartphones and things like that. But I want to ask you so much after reading that book, that era. It was such a historical era in Detroit. What were some of the key takeaways from just being a journalist and journalism in that era? I was amazed at some of the stories that you were sharing. It just seems like some of those stories are no longer there. I mean, we you look at journalism today versus where you were back in the era. What are some of the distinct differences between the era from the 70s to where we are today in terms of journalism at large and covering stories?
Well, the free press and news, they have like skeleton staffs, and that's being polite. It's like a super emaciated skeleton. They have tiny staffs. They have very little outreach. When I was at the free press, it was one of the best papers in the world. It was not unusual for star reporters at the New York Times to come to the free press because the free press had a reputation as the best writers' newspaper in the world. Had Sunday circulation of 700,000. The city room was huge and it was filled with noise and people. And, my first day on that Monday where I started as a copy boy, it was like when the Wizard of Oz switches to Technicolor.
Yeah.
I walked into that room, and during the course of the first hour or two, when reporters were arriving and editors were arriving, just the wire machines clacking and the pneumatic tubes going and the typewriters and editors hollering at reporters and reporters hollering for copy boys. It was just sensory overload. It was fabulous. Didn't make much. I was making $90 a week. It was considered grunt work. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
And to be part of that action, people in the journalism world now have no idea what they missed out on.
Yeah. And again, as you're talking, I'm just reflecting now as a reader, as a consumer. Now, not someone in that industry. I never was in that industry, particularly back in those days. I have these perceptions of the newsrooms, and you're doing a wonderful job of describing what that perception was. I just imagine people running into each other, somebody's dripping something off the machine and say, here, go cover that story. How much flexibility did you have to cover whatever you wanted to cover? And I think about that in the context of today. We know that a lot of newspapers are corporately owned now. And I believe the Free Press might have been, and the news may have been independently owned. I could be wrong. I don't recall. But how much flexibility did your editors, a Neil Shine, for example, that you work for the legendary Neil Shine, by the way, how much flexibility did they give you to cover stories?
You had a lot of freedom. The Free Press was part of night newspapers.
That's what it was.
Won Pulitzer Prizes in Miami and Philadelphia. It was maybe 6, 7 newspapers, but they were all magnificent. It ended up getting merged with Knight Ridder, and the corporate world started entering more into the newspaper business. And then, eventually, a couple decades later, whatever, it got bought by Gannett. But it was, you had the freedom to write stuff, and then you had editors who would back you up and print it. It was just a marvelous, wonderful, I don't necessarily be thrilled at being 77 years old, but I'm pretty thrilled with the memories of what I had, what I went through from a guy just walking down the street looking to fill out an application with no journalism background to end up having that kind of career. Just, you can't make that up.
You talk about editors backing you up. I was fascinated by the time when you did pitch the story about your personal challenge. And I think that Neil Shine calls you Hendo. Is that right? He calls you Hendo.
Yeah. Everybody called me Hendo.
Yeah,
I was sitting on a hillside in Jamaica. I had to escape Michigan to get away from my drug friends and sources. So I was on a hillside in Jamaica, and I wrote a letter to Dave Lawrence, who was the new executive editor. And I said, I've got a heck of a cocaine story to tell you if you want to buy it. I came back, and there was a letter waiting for me at my house. He said, we will buy it. I've told the Sunday magazine editor, you write it, we'll run it. And it was going to be a pseudonym, and it wasn't going to have my real name on it, but it was going to change everybody's name in the story. But it was this whole thing of how do you get involved? How does it become a 20-hour-a-day habit? How are lives being ruined? It was really pretty, self-serving to say this, but pretty dramatic. Yeah. Well, I get done. I wrote it way too long. It ended up the longest piece the Sunday magazine ever ran. I thought the editor was going to call me screaming about, why did you give me this massive thing? You need to trim it down. I called him and I said, how come you haven't yelled at me yet? He said, about what? I said, how long that thing is. He said, I didn't even trim it. We're running it as is. It's the best thing I've ever edited. I was like, oh my God. About 2 days later, Neil calls me at home. He says, Hendo, he says, great piece, loved it. He said, why don't you put your name on it? I said, are you kidding me? I'm going to put my name on it? He says, yeah. I said, easy for you to say. He says, well, it is easy for me to say, but you're a brand name in town. People know who you are. They don't know who that pseudonym is. You put your name on it, it's going to mean a lot more. I said, easy for you to say, Neil. He says, you're right, it is. I said, okay, put my name on it. And they told me when it was going to run, and I got the hell out of town again because I didn't know who was going to be really mad about this. Yeah. People that were selling to me, A couple of them had reputed mafia ties,
Mm.
So I said, yeah, put my name on it. And then I took off for like 6 weeks and figured, at least I won't get killed for the next 6 weeks.
So, what was the response to that story? And for those of you tuning in, we're talking to Tom Henderson, a legendary journalism person from Detroit. He's in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame, the Journalism Hall of Fame here in Michigan, amongst other awards that he's received. He's written for the Free Press and News. He's now an author. So, what were some? I'm just curious. After you wrote that story, what was the feedback, the overall feedback for the population at large? But for you personally, what were the implications and about your safety and how did you? I know you ran out of town for quite a while, but what were
Well,
some other
the funny thing
implications?
is, and to give Dave Lawrence credit, here was this admitted drug addict, and they right away gave me work. I wasn't an employee anymore. I had stopped being an employee, but I needed to make money. So the story was going to come out first Sunday or so in March. They hired me to go cover spring training. So
Hmm.
I'm going to go to Lakeland to hang out. I'm going to stay with Brian Bragg, who is the beat guy for the Free Press. He's going to put me up in his room so I don't have to pay rent. And I'm going to write stories on spring training. Well, I'm there about 3 days after my cocaine piece runs. I'm laying by the pool after the end of the day, and I hear, "Hey, Hendo." And I look up, and it's two of the guys that had sold me lots of cocaine over the years walking up to me. Well, I didn't know this, but when the Free Press ran my cocaine story on a Sunday, at the end it said, "Tom Henderson is now covering baseball for the Free Press in Lakeland, Florida." So they were reading the story and they're like, "Oh, Hendo's in Lakeland." So they immediately got on a plane and flew to Lakeland. And the first question, one of them was definitely connected. His parents were related to mafia. He was an Italian guy. The other guy was just a really well-to-do drug dealer. He inherited money. He was a Grosse Pointe guy. They walk up to me. I'm at the pool, and they says, "Oh, Hendo, what are you going to say when the police come looking for you?" And I said, "Nothing." They go, "What do you mean nothing? Who are you going to tell what to?" I said, "Nothing. I wrote the story." I said, "Reporters don't squeal on sources. I'm not saying a thing. That's just what we wanted to hear. Hey, we got a room over in St. Petersburg. You want to come with us and we'll snort coke all night?" And I thought I better go with them and snort coke all night. So they realized. So we spent the next 2 days snorting coke, with me taking breaks to go out for long runs. And then
Oh
they
my
were
God.
happy that I wasn't going to turn them in, and they flew home. And it turned out the police, nobody ever came to me to say, "Who are the people you were talking to?" I
Wow.
never had one question to answer from anybody. And I assumed they knew that, hey, the Free Press backed this. He's going to have an attorney from the Free Press. There's no point in pursuing this.
I mean, again, that's a fascinating story. You have a bunch of stories in this book, A Boomer's Tales. Feel free to, for a few more moments we have together. Is there another fun story that you want to share that, certainly we want to tease people, get them to buy the book, but what's another one of your favorite stories that you can
I'll
share
tell
with
you
the audience
two
at
of my
large?
favorites. One is how
Yes.
people, I taught journalism 3 times at Wayne State and Oakland University. People say, how do you do this or how do you do that? And I have to mostly say, I really don't know. It was all happenstance. How did I become a business reporter? I liked softball. How can that be the answer? Well, when I was copy editor in sports, and on the summer nights, you were expected just to hang around the office in case something happened. Well,
Hmm.
Mike Ilitch, who was growing this pizza business, he had a really good softball team. It was a professional softball team, and teams came in from around the country and they played. No media person in town was covering softball. I happened to be a softball junkie. I was playing 6 leagues a week. So
Mm.
it was an excuse to get out of the office to go watch his team play, and then I'd come back to the office and write a story. That was in the 70s, 76, 77, 78. 1982, he buys the Red Wings. The,
Mhm.
the Red Wing, the business editor calls his office, wants to do a profile. Ilitch never returns the call, won't return a call. So the editor sees that I've written about his softball team, 5 years earlier, calls me at home. I'm a freelance writer. He calls me at home. He says, "Do you think Mike Ilitch would return your phone call?" I said, "Yeah." So he says, "We can't get him to answer our calls." So I call Mike. He picks up the phone. I said, "Hey," and he said, "Yeah, let's have lunch tomorrow." So I go out the next day, have lunch with Ilitch, interview him, and write a story. The business editor says, that was a pretty good story for a sports reporter. You want to do more? Suddenly, I was a business reporter
Oh
and
my
stayed a business
gosh.
reporter for the next 40 years. The second story is a niche I'd carved out for myself was covering venture capital. Small funds in Michigan without a lot of attention, but investing in really cool University of Michigan startups. So I was freelancing, but I was selling regularly selling stories to the Detroit News. I go to an monthly angel investor meeting, 1998, and they always had a guest speaker. And this guest speaker this time was a guy that nobody knew named Rick Snyder. He'd just come back from California. They'd taken Gateway public. He had a bunch of money. He was coming back to Michigan, his home, and he was starting a venture capital firm. So he's talking at this lunch about his venture capital firm and what he wants to do. And I go up after and introduce myself. I'm Tom Henderson. I had my own card. I said I'm doing freelance stories for the Detroit News. This is a great one. And he got a look of panic on his face. He says, "Oh my God, I didn't know there were going to be newspaper people here." I said, "Why?" He says, I'm still raising money. The SEC will have my ass. I can't get. I said, "Okay." He said, "What do you mean by okay?" I said, "Well, here's my card. Call me when you're ready." I said, "But don't put out a press release. I don't want to see the free press with it or transitory business. You call me when you can talk." A month, 6 weeks later, he calls and he says, "Hey, Rick Snyder, I can talk. When do you want to meet?" I said, "Tomorrow." So I did the first profile of Rick Snyder for the Detroit News. I had to convince the news, we should do this. Well, who is he? Nobody ever heard of this guy. I said, he's raising funds. I heard him speak. Do it. So, that's a pretty cool thing to be the first guy to write a story on Rick Snyder.
Yeah, I mean, those are two great stories, and for more stories like that, again, he's now an author. He's written a book called A Boomer's Tales, and again, I'm going to turn over to you to kind of give a very brief overview of where can people get the book and anything else that you want to say in closing. And by the way, before we go, I got to ask you, how are you enjoying living up north? By the way, but before you go back to the answer to that question, give the details about the book. Where can they get information about it, purchase it, anything else you want to share about it?
Well, the book, I've written 5 true crime books for St. Martin's Press in New York. I've got a great agent. She was the agent for Hillary Clinton's first book and for Barack Obama. So she's the most famous agent in New York. When I went to her and said, "Hey, I'm doing a memoir," and she says, "Can't help you." I said, "What do you mean you can't help me?" She goes, "You're not famous. If you're not already famous or a social media influencer, no publisher is going to publish your book." She goes, "That's just the way it is." So I had to look into self-publishing. I self-published it. And it was much cheaper, easier process than I thought. It's available at Amazon. It's a Kindle book, paperback, hardback. You can't find it in local bookstores. If you come by my schoolhouse, I'll sell you a copy. So it's been fun. I've gotten 16 reviews at Amazon, and 15 of them are 5-star from former publishers of the Free Press, Dave Lawrence, to Stephen Kane, who's the most legendary reporter in the history of the Detroit News. So really good feedback from good people. And living up north, my first wife, and I'll try to keep this short. 1974, I was a copy editor in sports. I had Tuesday and Thursday off. My first wife was a school teacher. She had weekends off. So we never did anything together. She calls me at work one day and said, "Hey, there's an old schoolhouse up north for sale. Do you want to go see it?" I'm like, "Why do I want to go see an old schoolhouse up north?" She goes, "Well, you have Thursday off, right?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, let's go up Wednesday night. I'll call in sick Thursday. We'll get a motel room. We'll just go see this place." I said, "Oh my God, it's be like a honeymoon. My wife's going to go with me for Wednesday night." So it was, near Traverse City. We came and looked at it. It was this wonderful old one-room schoolhouse built in lumber boom days in 1895, when they were clear-cutting millions of acres of white pine. When the wood was gone, they closed the school, sold it into private hands. The state, decades later, put the forest together, but they thought it was still a working schoolhouse. So they didn't do eminent domain on this 1 acre. They left it privately owned. So it was just camping with a roof for decades. No electricity, no running water. You had an outhouse. You bathed in the lake, but it was a roof, and you had a wood burning stove, and it was fine. Well, my second wife, we had talked about someday we're going to fix it up. Someday we're going to fix it up. And she was a nurse in Grosse Pointe. And one day she said, "Don't take this personally, but I quit my job, but I've taken a job at Munson Hospital in Traverse City. Somebody had to do something or we're going to die, and that schoolhouse still won't be fixed up." So this is about 2004, 2005. So she got a job up here, started looking around, found a guy to come do work piecemeal, do a little bit, do a little bit, do a little bit. And suddenly, not suddenly, but here I am talking to you on a satellite internet, and I can go to the bathroom in the house, and I got a kitchen, and it's like a modern place, except it's this really cool old one-room schoolhouse in the forest.
Well, it's a long ways from Detroit, literally and figuratively. And I'm so glad you're doing well. This is a great conversation. I can talk to you all day, Tom Henderson. And I got to say, as
Hey,
we
you
wrap
get
up,
over up north, let me know ahead of time, and you come by and visit us, man.
I will definitely do that. I get up north periodically. And I get up in the Traverse City area for sure. So I want to thank you very much
Well,
for your
you
time.
got to come see us.
I will
You got to
definitely
come
do
see
that.
us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining me in the conference room. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I've been a fan of your work, and we had a conversation. I don't know if you remember it a long time ago about your father,
I remember that.
reminiscent about him,
Yes.
and so you've been on my radar for a long time.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you so much. I want to wish you all a great day, a great week. We will check you out next time in the conference room with Mark Essie. By the way, go out and buy his book. You can get a boomer sale. It's on Amazon. All right, we will talk to you all next time in the conference room. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.